I got to tell you, I think we all have our own benchmarks on the week, or as we move through the week. Oh, you've accomplished this thing, you did that thing. Oh, there's that Wednesday thing you have to do. There's that Thursday thing you have to do. That Friday. Oh, there's that Monday thing. You know, you're starting the new week. And I got to tell you, when I sit down to tape the Morning Pit for Friday morning, man, I feel like I'm really approaching the finish line on the week. We almost made it to the weekend, and here we are for the Friday edition of the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the deal. Like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. The like button's over there. The subscribe button's right down there. Click the subscribe button. Turn on the notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone anytime we go live, anytime we post a new video. You know, take yesterday, for instance. So morning, 6:30, 7 o'clock, somewhere around there, we post a new Morning Pit video, so you know about that. Later that, in the afternoon, we put up a video of Pat Narduzzi's post-practice press conference. Never really sure what time that's going to be online. Kind of depends on how long the video is and how the internet's working that day and when I get a chance to sit down and upload it. But you'll get an alert when it starts. And then Wednesday night was a great example of why you want to have notifications turned on. It's a little bit after 8 o'clock. It's almost time for our 8:30 live stream, and I get called away to something I need to go tend to, and I can't do the live stream. So I'm going to say, oh, okay, we got to cancel this. We'll do it Thursday night. And so you would have gotten a notification. Oh, it's no live show. It's Thursday night, And then got done with what I needed to take care of. It's a little after 9. I say, actually, let's just do it tonight. 9:15. Let's do a live show, a live Panther-Lair show at 9:15 on Wednesday night, which is what we ended up doing. You would have gotten a notification for it. You wouldn't have missed it. It was a lot of fun. We had a great show, a lot of great comments and questions and good conversation. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of that stuff. All right? Do it. Like the video and subscribe. Of course, I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. We have coverage there all day, every day, going on at Panther-Lair.com, just like the message boards are humming along with Pitt fans talking about Pitt stuff, whether it's football, basketball, or recruiting. There's a lot of conversation happening there all day, every day. Particularly right now, where recruiting is really bumping up for football. There's obviously spring camp going on in the South Side. There's a lot to talk about on that front. And then on the basketball front, people are still talking about the season that ended less than a week ago, which is pretty remarkable to think about. And then all the activity and the movement in the transfer portal as Pitt looks to fill out the 2023-24 roster. And that's going to be something we are watching and tracking over the next few months. So there's a lot going on at Panther-Lair.com, and actually there was a little added bonus for the Panther-Lair.com subscribers. They got to choose the direction of today's Morning Pit. And this might be something we do. This might be like a regular Friday feature, a little mailbag feature. It's always fun to do a mailbag, and I don't feel like it's a cheap way out or a lazy way. I mean, to some extent, yes, it's a lazy way out. I don't have to think of one topic to talk about or two topics to talk about. But it is a way for me to say, hey, what are you thinking about? What do you want to know about? What do you want to talk and hear about on the Morning Pit? So I put it out there for premium subscribers to Panther-Lair.com. I said, what's your questions? You got questions on football, basketball, recruiting. What are they? We'll talk about them today on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit. And we might do this, really since we're past basketball season now. We might do this the rest of the way, like down, through the spring and the summer, until we get into training camp, just as a regular Friday feature, a mailbag edition of the Morning Pit, I should say. And so, let's do it. And the first question that came in the mailbag was from Potter County native, and he said, "Who do you think will be the biggest surprises to step up on offense and defense? A player each that we might not expect." And I was kind of glancing over the questions before I sat down here to tape this Morning Pit, and I tried to just so you don't want to get totally caught off guard. You want to have some general idea, or if you see a question that that might merit some research, I should go look that up a little bit. Just to be prepared to give a little bit more than just an off the cuff answer. But it's not. I feel like the answers. For starters, let me say this. When we talk about breakout players or surprises, sometimes I don't know if there are a lot of surprises for the most part, just because we all, in this space that we occupy, and I don't mean space in sort of like, oh, this industry, I mean you and me, who we sit here and I record these morning pits every day. You listen to the morning pit every day. You read everything on Panther-Lair.com. I write everything on Panther-Lair.com. I mean, I don't write all of it, but I write a lot of stuff on Panther-Lair.com. We're on the message boards all day. All you and I do is think about Pitt, right? I mean, like, if somebody, Jerry DePaula, our good friend at the Tribune Review, one time was like, I don't know how you do that 1 hour show or something like that. How you all, in the middle of July, you find things to talk about. I'm like, Jerry, this is all I do. I just like write about Pitt and think about Pitt all the time. So sitting down to talk about it for a half hour or an hour, it's not really that hard. I've got a lot of thoughts because that's all I've been doing is turning these thoughts over in my brain. And I feel like, most of the fans and the people who read Panther-Lair.com or listen to these podcasts, watch these videos, tune into the live streams, all those things, most of you guys are probably the same way. You pretty much just think about Pitt all the time. And as such, there's only so many guys on the roster. There's a lot of guys on the roster, but there's only so many. And eventually you come to a point, either at the end of spring camp or at the end of August or mid-August, where you've thought about and talked about and written about everybody on the roster. And so it becomes less a matter of who's a surprise or a breakout. Sometimes it becomes more a matter of like, who did we spend way too much time talking about who's not going to do anything at all? So it's a little bit trickier to name surprises. So I'll take as an example, all right? The wide receiver position, okay? So you've got Konate Mumfield and Bub Means, right? You have those guys coming back. You don't have anything else coming back. Now, in the search to try and find out who could step up, in the search to try to find out who could be the guy or guys who could break out at that position, we've pretty much talked about everyone. We've talked about Dejon Reynolds. We've talked about Miles Alston. He got a mention from Pat Narduzzi this week and looked pretty good in practice, I got to say. We've talked about Lamar Seymour. We've talked about the freshmen coming in who aren't here yet. We've talked about Izzy Polk, who is here. We've talked about Kenny Johnson and Zion Fowler, who aren't here yet. We've talked about Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko. We've talked about the walk-ons, Jake McConaughey. I mean, we've talked about all those guys. So if I say, here's a name to keep an eye on, if I tell you Dejon Reynolds is the name to keep an eye on, and I think he's going to be a pretty good player for Pitt this year at wide receiver, you say, well, that's not much of a surprise. They have two returning contributors at receiver, and they brought him in as a transfer to be the number 3, so he should live up to that job, right? I mean, I do think Reynolds will be good. I think, you could get clever with it and say Konate Mumfield will have a breakout year, although he had a breakout year at Akron 2 years ago. Failed to live up to that, mark at Pitt last season. But I think he could finally be that player, and I think he could finally reach the level that they expected to get out of him when he transferred from Akron. So, I mean, he could have a breakout campaign. Running backs, like, you got Rodney Hammond, you have Sebo Flemister, you brought in Derek Davis. So maybe Davis has a backup or a breakout campaign as a running back there. But I feel like we just sort of know all of these guys. It's just a question of trying to figure out which ones are really going to step up and contribute. I think that Mumfield and Means are going to catch a lot of passes. I think that Hammond and Flemister are going to carry the ball a lot. Bartholomew is going to get the ball a lot. Maybe Carter Johnson. I think Carter Johnson is an intriguing guy who really didn't get the ball a whole lot last year. I think he might have some, maybe they could work him in a little bit more. But, this team's ultimate success, it's going to be getting the ball to Mumfield, Means, Hammond, Flemister, Bartholomew, potentially Davis. Maybe Derek Davis is a guy you could look at as a possible breakout on offense. Maybe not as much of a surprise because we all know about him. We've talked about him so much, but a breakout candidate, I would say. So maybe Derek Davis. Maybe that'll be my guy I would pick as a possible breakout after, 5 or 6 practices so far in spring. And on defense, I think this will be a big season for Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara. I think Kamara had a big season last year. I think DeShields kind of matches what Kamara did last year, and I think Kamara this year takes an even bigger step forward. I think you're going to have breakout performances across the defensive line, whether it's the ends with Dayon Hayes, who's played a lot but hasn't really broken out in that way. I think a guy like a Bam Brima. I think some of the younger guys like Nakai Johnson or even Sam Ogunlola or Jimmy Scott, they've gotten a lot of positive pub. I think Sean Fitzsimmons at defensive tackle could be really make an impact. I mean, he just looks disruptive. He's got that motor that I think he'll just be a real pain to deal with for offensive guards. So I think you can see breakout seasons there. And then I think the new starters at safety, particularly Javon McIntyre, who made big plays last year, I think could end up having a real breakout campaign. So there's a lot of guys. I basically named all the new starters on defense and a few of the returning guys on defense and a couple of guys on offense there. Lothrop22 says, when does Pitt basketball get their first transfer and who will it be? Those are good questions. Those are both good questions. I think last year they started finally pulling guys in around April, I think is when it happened. So maybe you're looking at that period. Let me look up I should have looked this up, or I should know it off the top of my head. The recruiting calendar. Because I think this is probably in play here. So it's a dead period until March 6th. March 30th until April 6th, I should say. It's a recruiting period right now, starting next Thursday through April 6th. So basically through the Final Four, I guess is what it works out to be. Is that right? Well, I don't know what day April 6th is. April 6 is like the Thursday after those games. So you have a recruiting dead period there where you can't have visits. You can't have any in-person contact. And I think in-person contact and the visits are really a big key to pulling this off. I don't see Pitt. Pitt probably won't get commitments from guys who don't take official visits. I'm guessing, they'll bring guys in on visits and then start landing a few of the transfers. We'll get a better idea of who's a serious candidate and who's a legitimate target once we start seeing guys who are visiting or who get visits from the coaches. That's always something important to remember at this time of year too. It's going to be all over Twitter. It's a Twitter bonanza right now, and the people who sort of make a living on Twitter, spreading news on Twitter. I mean, this is the field day. This is the big time right here because there's so many things to tweet about. So many tweets and so little time to tweet out all of the contacts and the things like that. But remember, I think there's varying degrees and varying levels of interest. And you might see a list that has 20 schools have reached out to so-and-so. Well, for 19 of those schools, it might never go beyond that initial DM that says, hey, how's it going? Or, hey, just checking in or something like that. There may never be another response back or forth after that. But that DM alone, that direct message alone was enough to get that school on the list of, so-and-so has reached out to, Niagara Guard, whoever. You know what I mean? So you see these lists, and I think it serves as a starting point. So, okay, there's been some kind of contact there. Let's investigate. Let's see where it goes from there. Let's find out what happens next. And sort of the next step is extended conversation, communication, coaches visiting them, and them visiting campus in either in that order or the reverse order. And then you really get a sense of who is a legitimate target, who's really being pursued by the staff, and who's genuinely interested in the school. So you kind of, you keep that in mind as you move through all of this. But I think right now you're seeing a lot of that contact, has been contacted by. And we're getting a sense of some of the guys that Pitt appears to be interested in. We'll get a better sense as you move through, these open recruiting periods where the transfers can take visits. And then, you kind of really get a sense of it. So I'm guessing it'll be into April. And I have no idea who that first transfer will be because, like I said, I think we're still trying to get a real idea of who the real targets are, the legitimate targets. But it's fun to watch. It's fun to follow. And it's fun to track because there's a lot of names out there right now. See the next question. H2P_JC says, do you think Elliot Donald makes an impact this year? Is him moving around on the line per Pat Narduzzi the other day a good thing or a bad thing? Not cutting it on the inside or talented enough that they're trying everything they can to get him on the field as much as possible? Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. I think, like, I'm not sure about Elliot Donald's development. I think he looks the part. I think when you watch him move, you say this guy can make an impact. I think he's had points probably this spring and certainly last August and last spring where we heard about it, that he was making a big impact, that he was making plays, that he was really showing some of the flash and potential you saw out of him in high school and you hope to get in college. Obviously he hasn't gotten on the field, but he's also been behind, Kalijah Cansey, Devin Danielson, Tyler Bentley, David Green. He's been behind a bunch of defensive tackles, and sort of remarkably, those guys have stayed pretty healthy. There hasn't been a need for Pitt to go 6 or 7 deep at defensive tackle over the last couple of years. Now, Cansey's gone. They bring back those other 3 upperclassmen, but there's certainly an opportunity for younger D tackles to step in, whether it's Elliot Donald or Sean Fitzsimmons, like I mentioned earlier. DeAndre Jules plays in the middle. I'm not sure what to make of Pat Narduzzi's comment that Elliot Donald is playing a little end, a little tackle. I think it's trying to give him opportunities to get on the field and see what fits best and where he's going to be able to get on the field the quickest. Maybe that speaks highly of or maybe that reflects well upon the other defensive tackles, the 3 upperclassmen, and then, guys like Fitzsimmons and Jules. Maybe they're doing so well that they say, oh, well, maybe Elliot, maybe you got a better opportunity at end. Let's try you out there and see if you can cut it out there. He's a bigger end, like he's a bulkier end, but he's not. I mean, he's not a big thumping nose tackle, that you're trying to move out to end. So I'll be curious to see how it goes. I think he's got the ability to make an impact. But with the depth and the experience that's ahead of him or around him at defensive tackle, he's going to have to really earn his way onto the field to show what kind of impact he can make. Pitt Chag says, Chris, where would you rank Pitt's football and basketball NIL operations among our ACC peers? And specifically, what have you seen Capel make a push for increased NIL in the wake of the season's success? That is I don't want to say it's a loaded question, but it's a heavy question with a lot of layers to unpack. The first thing I would say, I can't really compare it to Pitt's ACC peers. I don't know what those other schools have going on. The thing about the NIL landscape so far, and this might end up being the last question because it's a good question with a lot to it. I might end up taking this one on the message boards as well, just to expand on it a little bit. The thing about NIL operations, collectives, all these things that you're seeing across the country is it's very much the wild, wild west, and not necessarily in the way the coaches mean it. Oh, it's the wild, wild west. You're just buying players all over the place and all that stuff. It's the wild, wild west in that it's a completely unregulated industry. I mean, moderate regulations at the compliance level for the universities, but it's completely unregulated industry with, no real certifications or licensures or anything establishing the people at the top of these organizations, running these organizations. They're not picked by the school. Well, I shouldn't say they're not picked by the schools. I think there are schools that have probably, I can only assume, and I assume this based on how I think they approach all of their sports at some of these schools. I would imagine there are schools that have had a very direct, if sort of untraceable hand in vetting the operations that are put together for these collectives, the people involved, the way they're organized, the way they're set up, and the way they operate. I would think that there's probably a lot of that. I think there's also a lot where it's truly operating as a third-party entity, that it's not connected to the university other than, through some communication with little input or little influence from the university, which leads to the wild, wild west, truly the wild, wild west, because you have people just sort of operating independently. And I've always said, like, going back years, I've always said that I think ultimately, like, coaches it's great if people are speaking highly of their school to recruits and stuff. But ultimately, I think it makes coaches nervous because coaches like to control the message. And they like to make sure that what a recruit is hearing is what they want them to hear. Like recruiting, it's all about sales, right? And sales is all about directing the message to the consumer and making sure the consumer hears the exact right message that consumer needs and wants to hear in order to convince them to buy the product, right? And I mean, coaches are very much the same way. I mean, they're control freaks by nature. Whatever that extra gene is to be a control freak, coaches have it. And I mean, the successful ones at least. The ones who are not control freaks usually, I think, don't pan out. But the ones who are really successful are usually control freaks. And so they want to control every element of their program. They want to control every aspect, and they want to control every message that's being communicated to recruits. But what you've got is these entities operating out in the ether, sort of on their own in some cases. In some cases, I think in some schools, there's very much a lot of interaction and overlap and communication and direction off the record, of course, and off the books. But I think that does exist. But I think for a lot of schools, it's not. And these collectives are operating sort of on their own to a certain extent. And so what you end up with is it's not a very standardized industry, and you get guys like this dude in Miami, the dude up in Syracuse, and you're like, wow, this is who's representing Syracuse's interest to recruits. He's walking in with Jalen Hurts on the sideline of a Syracuse basketball game. This is who's representing Syracuse's interest. Is that what Syracuse wants? It's and so, see, I already went off on like a long tangent, barely even touching, only tangentially connected to the question that was originally asked about Pitt's ACC peers. So I don't know a lot about what those operations are. It's not something that's easily researched. It's not something that's easily documented or readily available through documentation, at least something that you and I could look up. So it's hard for me to say what Virginia is doing, or Louisville is doing, or Boston College is doing, or Miami, we all know what Miami is doing. And they're probably even doing more beyond what we've all heard and seen and read about. And so when I look at what Pitt has and what Pitt's operation is, and I say Pitt's operation, and I say the operation that's operating in, ostensibly in the interests of Pitt. When I look at that, I can't really compare it to other ACC schools. It's hard for me to say. I mean, I think in terms of straight cash, homie, Pitt probably is lower than, I couldn't even estimate. But I would say they're probably right around the middle range of the ACC would be my guess, just based on different anecdotal things about this or that you might hear. I don't think they're at the top of the food chain in terms of NIL money that's going out, football and basketball, individually and collectively, in the conference. I don't think they're at the bottom either. I think there have been efforts afoot. I don't think those efforts have always gotten off the ground. I don't think, as a university, you can't necessarily, there's only so much you can do to facilitate some of these operations. I don't know if Pitt has always done even what it's allowed to do. I guess if that makes sense. I don't know if Pitt has always done as much as it can to try to get this going and get it working to help the football and basketball programs and anyone else who needs it to stay competitive and be competitive. So, but I think every school has had to answer some of these questions on their own and figure this out on their own, and different schools have come to different answers. Some schools have taken it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission approach. Some schools have gone the opposite way. And I think Pitt is probably more the latter than the former. I don't see Pitt as being the type of school that prefers to ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission. The second half of your question, and this will be our last question. Pitt Chag, you really hit it with a big question here that I could probably keep going for another 25 minutes about this. But the other questions that were posted, we will get to those. I'm going to save those, and we'll keep chugging along through these because there's some good questions in here that I would like to talk about. But Pitt Chag second half says specifically, have you seen Capel make a push for increased NIL in the wake of the season's success? I can't say I have. I can't say that I've seen, or heard of Jeff Capel being sort of directly connected to the NIL conversations. My general impression is that Pat Narduzzi and Jeff Capel have kept themselves as far out of it as they can without, being a detriment to the efforts. I think my impression is they've participated as much as they need to. They've also tried to be as far removed from it as possible, and not just for plausible but deniability, but because I think they both are unsure about the role a head coach should have in facilitating those things. And again, these are questions that probably a lot of schools are trying to determine right now, or trying to answer, and a lot of coaches are trying to answer. So I don't think, and this is just my own hunch, I don't think Jeff Capel got on the phone to Alliance 412 and said, we need $250,000 to get the transfers we want so we can go win the ACC next year. I don't think that phone call has happened. And I don't think you're asking if something that specific did take place, but I don't think that phone call has happened. I think when these NIL things happen, by and large, they don't happen in the head coach's office. By and large, is my sort of read on the situation with different people I've talked to over the last, it feels like it's almost 2 years now that we've been in this era of college sports. And it's ever evolving. But that's a good question, Pitt Chag. A couple of good questions. And I definitely, I think we'll have to have more of this conversation on the message boards, I think, because there's a lot to talk about on the NIL front. There's a lot to talk about on the Pitt NIL front. I think we have a lot to discuss. So make sure you stay tuned at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com for those conversations. We've got a lot to talk about there. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. If you posted a question in that mailbag thread, obviously we only got to a few here today, but they were good questions, a lot to talk about. If you posted a question in there, leave it there. We will get to it. We'll do it again next Friday. We'll do another mailbag edition of the Morning Pit next Friday. It should be a good time. So I think that's it. We made it through the week. It's always good to be to Friday. It's the start of the day here on Friday, but it'll be a good end to the week. Even if it's a little rainy, it's going to be nice and warm. So you can't go out and play, but you can, you can't go out and throw the football, but you can sit on the porch and, have a cold one and watch the rain. So thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for tuning in this week. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for following all our coverage on Panther-Lair.com, coverage of Pitt basketball, coverage of Pitt training camp, coverage of Pitt recruiting, and everything else we do, Panther-Lair.com. So go check it out, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks for checking it out, checking out the podcast today, checking out the video and everything on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope you had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back to talk to you Monday morning for another Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.